Gold speculation reaches a record low. Could this be the perfect time to start acquiring gold assets? Amir Nani, top resource entrepreneur and recipient of Casey's 10-Bagger Club, thinks so. In an environment where nearly 70% of TSX venture mining companies have a market cap of less than $5 million, Amir's new gold company, Brazil Resources, just raised $6.4 million through an oversubscribed private placement, with the biggest buyers being management, Doug Casey of Casey Capital Strategies, and legendary investor Rick Rule. BRI also just completed the acquisition of Brazilian Gold Corp, which will more than double their in-ground gold minerals. Brazil Resources seizing the opportunity.
Greetings and thank you for joining us at FutureMoneyTrends.com. I'm here with Karen Hudes, a former senior counselor at the World Bank. She worked for the legal department at the World Bank from 1986 to 2007. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Karen, as a World Bank whistleblower, and for those of you who are just hearing of you, what did you blow the whistle on?
Corruption. What I reported was that there was a group inside the World Bank that thought they were above the law. At the time I started reporting the corruption, I didn't realize that this same group was part of a huge conspiracy in the entire world. What I was reporting was that the books in the World Bank were being fiddled. And in particular, I had been working in the Philippines, and there was a project where the president of the Philippines was robbing the country, and the World Bank director was trying to disperse a project without the conditions being met. It ended in a huge banking catastrophe with a run on the bank, the second largest bank in the Philippines, for $500 million, and the World Bank canceled its loan for $200 million, and the Japanese canceled their loan for $200 million, and the evaluation department did a cover-up and told the board that there was no way that the people at the World Bank could have predicted this catastrophe, whereas I had been telling the country director that this was a problem, that there was corruption, and he tried to reassign me. So there was a cover-up of this failed project in the Philippines, and you're not supposed to have a cover-up in a bank.
Yeah.
And I was interviewed for the job of general counsel, and during the interview, when they asked me why is it that there was a revolving door for general counsels, I said that's because the World Bank is not in compliance. That's a buzzword. That means when a bank like the World Bank issues bonds on the capital market, and it issues $180 billion worth of bonds, you have to have accurate financial statements. You cannot have a cover-up. If there's a cover-up, that means that money is going the wrong way, and it has to be resolved. And so I knew that the executive search firm had been trying to resolve this corruption, and the problem had not been resolved. So I knew as a lawyer inside a bank that had a cover-up problem that problem needed to be resolved, and when it wasn't resolved, I did what a lawyer is supposed to do. I went up the corporate ladder. I went to the audit committee. When that didn't work, I went to the U.S. Treasury Department. When that didn't work, I went to the U.S. Congress. And when that didn't work, I went to the world. And I have been at the world blowing the whistle. And when I say at the world, what I mean is I have gone to each and every auditor. I've gone to something called this International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, and I've been collaborating with all the whistleblowers of the world. And we're bound and determined that we're going to get this corruption taken care of. When Elaine Colville, who is a Scottish whistleblower, and I got our statements up on the UK Parliament website, a very accurate is called a power transition model. It uses political science and computer modeling. That model is 90 to 95% accurate, and it is predicting that the corruption that has been plaguing the world, it turns out, for millennia, is coming down. A lot of people call that the matrix. A lot of people call it the banksters. It's actually much, much more. And because all of the whistleblowers are working together, we have solved the mystery as to why humanity has had nothing but wars and terrible problems, why we're always at each other's throats.
Now, what makes you think the powers that be who control our interest rates, our money, and they freely manipulate the markets? What makes you think it can end? Because my discouragement, I guess, is like people like you and Snowden and other whistleblowers. Then to follow up, there's no arrest, there's no change, and major media won't even cover it.
I understand very well. Now, there is a big distinction between me and Ed Snowden, who, by the way, the mere fact that he is getting coverage on the mainstream media should be letting people know that he is part of the matrix, because the mainstream media is owned and controlled by the same group that is the owners of the Bank for International Settlement. That's the same group that's charging interest on countries' debt. That's not logical. That is a scam. What's supposed to happen is that people are supposed to have currency that's issued by their governments directly, which doesn't carry interest. And that is what John F. Kennedy was trying to do, and the reason why he was assassinated. That's what Lincoln was doing with the greenbacks. That's why Lincoln was assassinated. And that's why people don't know in their history the connection between this, because there is this corrupt group that's trying to keep people dumb, dumbing people down. And we learned about this group because there's 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology that took data on who owns all of the companies on the capital market. That's 43,000 companies. Mm-hmm. And they found out that it's actually one group. It's they take the same directors and put them on boards. That's called interlocking directors. So the banks that are too big to fail, that's really one banking cartel. And that group is going around buying up politicians. There are secret societies like the Knights of Malta. They're promoting people and making sure that those people become gatekeepers. And one of those Knights of Malta is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's Martin Dempsey. So although the United States has a very powerful military, that military is being co-opted because we've got traitors at the head.
Now,
and we have documented all of this. So many people do not know, for example, that in Charleston, South Carolina, there was supposed to be a nuclear device detonated on October 8th. And instead, 2 heroes made sure that nuclear device went off the coast. And the Russians told people about that because they intercepted the naval communications. Not only that, but seismograph records caught the fact that there was, it wasn't an earthquake because earthquakes build up. This was a nuclear device.
Now, when was this nuclear explosion?
It was the 8th of October. Can you imagine? They were planning on nuking Charleston. They wanted a false flag so that they could have a military crackdown. That's what they have in mind for us. They're trying to crash the U.S. dollar. They're printing all of this paper currency with absolutely no backing. That is, they call it quantitative easing to try to anesthetize people and let people think that there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. It's called treason. They're trying to crash the U.S. dollar, which is going to crash.
Karen, did you come in light of this information while you were at the World Bank, or is this since 2007, since you left?
Yes, a lot of it is from working with whistleblowers after I left. I left in 2007, but between 2007 and 2009, I went back inside the building, and I met with the executive directors because they knew me as a straight shooter. And I was the one that told them that they should have an audit of the World Bank internal controls. So they hired KPMG to do that. And when KPMG did not follow the audit standards, I bought a World Bank bond, and I sued the World Bank, and I sued KPMG as a bondholder, which meant that the World Bank was not immune. My lawsuit was settled by 188 ministers of finance, but I couldn't get back in the door because there's a company called Allied Barton which provides security personnel. And Allied Barton won't let me in the door. And then I found out the most incredible thing that I didn't understand at the time, and that is that there is much more gold in the world than people know about. And that might have been the reason why the general counsel who brought me into the World Bank, Ibrahim Shihada, he was an Egyptian lawyer who had worked for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries before he came to the World Bank. The first country he assigned me to was Jordan and Yemen, which is where I worked for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then he put me on the Philippines. Well, I found out that the Philippines is where most of the world's gold is buried. I found this out because there's a German banker lawyer named Wolfgang Struck who contacted me. And, you know, we've been in touch with each other for almost a year now. He showed me all of the documentation. Ferdinand Marcos was the person who took back the gold from the Vatican. 600,000 metric tons of gold. I'm not kidding. And
now,
John F. Yes.
Why would they keep this secret, though? Because it seems like if they wanted to manipulate the gold price down, they could flood the market with gold right now.
Because it's not their gold.
You're saying
it's humanity. It's in a trust fund. Ferdinand Marcos tied it up. But what they've been doing is they've been playing with, you know, how when you have assets, they earn money.
Yeah.
So they've been the elite of the world. Instead of following the ownership documentation, it's in a trust fund, and the authorized signatory is Wolfgang Struck. The bankers will not allow Wolfgang Struck to withdraw that gold. What he wanted to do with it, what he has told me he's prepared to do with it, is what John F. Kennedy was doing just before he was shot. 10 days before John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he had signed something called the Green Hilton Agreement. Hilton as in Hilton Hotel. Mm-hmm. And that agreement provided that there would be gold allocated to the United States to underpin dollars that John F. Kennedy actually printed up. They're uncut dollars. They're in the Union Bank of Switzerland. And so I asked General Dempsey on the 2nd of December at a town hall meeting, I said, since John F. Kennedy was assassinated by the Jesuits, and we know this because Gambino, when he got out of jail, said that the mafia were told by the Jesuits to fire the kill shot. There was a mafioso hidden in a sewer. So as the limousine drove by, that's the shot that killed John F. Kennedy.
Now, Karen, anyway, when you say the Jesuits, yeah. I'm not familiar with that term. That is a Roman Catholic. It's an elite group of priests, correct?
They're not priests. They're the military order for the Vatican, and they are in control of the Vatican's wealth. And through the centuries, from the 1500s, they have been assassinating popes. They've been assassinating kings. They tried to prevent the Reformation, the Protestants. They were the ones, John Wilkes Booth was a Jesuit. He's the one that killed Lincoln. They have been banned from Europe. As a matter of fact, some people say that the only reason that the Revolutionary War was successful was because all of Europe was in an uproar against the Jesuits at the time of the Revolutionary War. They have a history. If you read their oath, they say that they will smash babies' skulls, that the end justifies the means. They are the scum of the earth, and their history is very well understood.
Okay, so you say this with a lot of certainty as far as who killed who. What documentation or what have you seen that is not basically in broader light to most people like myself?
People have written many, many, many books, but because of the economic strength of these groups, which have bribed their way through all of the leaders. So, for example, the Democrats and the Republicans, or the Congress. Did you know, for example, that we had a second Constitution in 1871? After the debts for the Revolutionary War came due, and we couldn't meet those obligations, that's when we got a second constitution so that the United States is incorporated as a company, and the President of the United States is the chief executive officer, and the Congress acts like managers of the company rather than representing the constituency, rather than respecting our first constitution. And this is understood by a number of people. There's a lot of documentation on this now. People are starting to spread the word, but you're not going to get this in your universities. You're not going to be taught this in the schools. You're not going to get this on the mainstream media, which is totally owned and controlled by this banking cartel.
So Karen, what ultimately happens, because you have an unquestioned authority when it comes to the governments and central banks from the public, and then you have the media who is controlled. You have you and whistleblowers, and then you got let's say 1 million to 5 million people on the internet that follow alternative media regularly. What ultimately happens? Because it seems like it's kind of like you versus the world in what you're trying to expose here.
Not exactly. What we have is we have the internet, and we have this very powerful political science modeling tool that predicts that coalitions will coalesce. And it predicted that the people of this planet did not want to be dominated by this economic force, and that might does not make right, and that nobody is above the law. And so it predicted that if we kept going, we were going to take back the rule of law in the world. And so what you're seeing, I can parse this out for you, because I have been writing to all of the countries, and I've been in touch with the U.S. Congress all this time. When I went to the U.S. Congress, Senator Lugar wrote 3 letters to the World Bank saying, "Do not fire this lady." When they fired me, I didn't understand about this world corruption. I didn't understand what had happened. But I did understand this political science modeling tool, which said that if I kept going, that I was ultimately going to be able to work together with coalitions, and that is what has happened. So there's something called the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They have now organized their own development bank. They are no longer using dollars in international trade. That's 25% of international trade. A UK lawyer told me after I got my statement up on the UK Parliament that I should go to the credit rating agencies. So I did. Standard & Poor lowered the U.S. credit rating, and that's when Eric Holder sued Standard & Poor. The lawyer representing Standard & Poor said, he was suing us when we lowered the U.S. credit rating. Now there's a 4th credit rating agency called the Universal Credit Rating Group. That is created by Russia and China. So these are the coalitions I'm telling you about, and I am working with them, and they are expecting that the American people are going to take back their republic, that they're going to insist on honest dollars. Because when we have to pay interest on our debt, that interest flies to the City of London, and that 40% of it stays there, and the rest of the 60% of our tax dollars are going to the Vatican. This is not sustainable. This is not going to continue. And there is something called the Article 5 of the Constitution. It says that when 2/3 of the state legislatures request a constitutional convention, there will be a constitutional convention. Well, 42 state legislatures have requested a constitutional convention, but it hasn't materialized. The Congress thinks instead of doing its job representing its constituents, it's supposed to be a trader and a manager for a corporation. Now, this is something that enough Americans understand and will not accept, and there will be a constitutional convention, and we will take our country back and our Constitution back, and we will not have, as our chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a man who wants the U.S. dollar to crash.
Karen, I want to touch on that because you said they want the dollar to crash. To me, I I'm going to excuse my ignorance, but why would they want the dollar to crash if everything is working for them right now? They control the world. So what is their solution to the dollar crash? Obviously they're going to have a new currency they can control.
Okay, let's separate this in little pieces. Okay?
Yes.
There is, first of all, people ought to know how I can say with certainty that the dollar is going to crash. That's because gold is a very good indicator. And we are now in a situation where when you go to buy gold for immediate delivery, the price is higher than if you were going to take delivery of the gold in the future. That's called gold backwardation. That is a red alert. I just had an interview with Antal Fekete. He's the world's leading monetary economist. Mm-hmm. So that's one sign. If you look in the COMEX market, the amount of gold is just about depleted. There's also something called leasing of gold, where the central banks will lease gold bullion. They stopped doing that in July because they knew at the end of the lease term they wouldn't get their gold back. Now, we are on the very edge of something called permanent gold backwardation. That means that people will not sell their gold for any price because they know that paper is paper and gold is gold. They have lost confidence in the fiat paper currencies. If that is allowed to proceed and happen, we will enter something very similar to the Dark Ages. We won't be able to pay for international trade. We will have pestilence. We will have mass starvation. And that is not going to be allowed to happen.
Okay. What will be what are they striving to get, though? What is the currency that they want that control us if they crash the dollar?
Every day when I turn on my computer, I'm getting an email from somebody who's trying to pretend like they have a right to the world's gold, which is most of it is in the Philippines, and a lot of it is in the Union Bank of Switzerland. It's tied up in what's called the collateral account. And this money, this gold, belongs to humanity. There are conditions on this gold which simply say that it's to benefit humanity. And it's going to benefit humanity. It's going to replace the paper currency that we have so that our currency is interest-free, so that our tax dollars are not going to the Vatican.
Okay, so let's talk about the Vatican, because for most people, including myself, I've been studying the economic collapse for almost 10 years now, and Austrian economics, and I haven't seen too many things on the Vatican. You've mentioned them several times. Well, if you could just introduce people and just kind of let them know, what is your overall theory? And I know you actually touched on a lot here, but who's calling the shots at the Vatican? I'm assuming it's not the Pope.
Well, there's something called the Black Pope, but that's not the ultimate reason why we've been in the fix that we're in. What we have found out, and this sounds implausible, but it is absolutely correct. The fact that it's been held in secret doesn't mean that it's not true. It is true. There's a second species on this planet. They're not extraterrestrials. They're very much with us. They made maps in the previous ice age. The remnants of their civilizations are all over the place. A lot of times along the coast it's submerged because the the sea level has gone up by 400 meters. But this group has large brains. They're very distinct from Homo sapiens. Their DNA is so different that if the two species mated, their offspring would be infertile. And we know this because their DNA was just tested. They have skulls all over the place because they have been on Earth with us. But after the Ice Age, there weren't that many of them. And so they've been hiding. And one of the places that they've been hiding is in the Vatican. That's why the Vatican are wearing those meters. It turns out that that's also what the high priest wore in the early beginnings of Judaism. Moses was actually Akhenaten, who was a pharaoh. They know this because the papyrus that was taken from one of the pyramids talks about this. The people that are doing archaeology in Israel know this. And the reason is that not only is Homo capensis trying to keep human beings under control by divide and conquer using our money system, they've also been doing this with our religions, organized religions, trying to get human beings to hate people of different religious faiths so that they will kill each other off, so that the people in the back of manipulating human beings could stay in, what can I say, could use us like cattle. That's what's been going on through our history.
Okay, Karen, you are an attorney. You worked for the World Bank for 20 years. What you're saying is this is on the fringe of conspiracy. It sounds crazy. So, I mean, obviously you've had to come to terms with this. What have you seen that has made you so confident to actually say this kind of stuff publicly?
Because they have been going to meetings. I sent an email to a fellow in Portugal, and the next day he went to a meeting of bankers, and he sent me back an email saying that at that meeting there had been a big-skulled individual with bright blue eyes. Another person in touch with Dr. Edward Spencer, who's a retired neurologist, he's the one who started telling me about this. A friend of his was in Egypt and saw these Homo capensis running around. Their skulls are all over the planet. It's not a conspiracy theory. Just because this group likes to hide and likes to accuse people of having conspiracy theories doesn't make these facts wrong. They're facts.
No, they don't. And I struggle with a lot of conspiracies because, of course, like let's say the moon landing or something, where it would take, at least probably 100 people. They got to keep it's hard to keep a secret. So, it just is. It's hard to keep secrets. And especially when you've got people like you saying stuff, but then of course no one listens. So what is your thinking? What do you think? How is the world going to unfold over the next 5 to 10 years?
It's not true that nobody's listening. I can tell you, I am working within a coalition. Why is it that you think the Russians are not counterattacking with what happened in the Ukraine? How do you account for the United States toppling a legal elected government in the Ukraine? This is a terrible scenario. This would mean a World War III, except for the fact that the Russians know full well that enough Americans are aware of the manipulations of the banksters. All wars are bankers' wars. World War II was going to end 3 years before it did, except that the Americans were trying to get their hands on this gold that I'm telling you about. Yeah?
Well, I mean, look, the gold... What you're saying basically is that there's more gold than has been reported, but by a large amount, by like more than double.
That's right. It was 600,000 metric tons that came back from the Vatican to the Philippines.
Now that's amazing because I think there's only about 170,000 tons of publicly reported gold. So now, as far as let's get to the movement of this gold. What besides maybe some documentation of some certificates that the gold is there? What documentation or evidence have you seen? That's a hell of a lot of gold they've got to move.
Okay, there is a lot of gold in Switzerland, in the Union Bank of Switzerland, and there is a lot of gold in the Central Bank of the Philippines. It's there, real gold.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's. I think I don't know how much Fort Knox has, but I think.
No, the gold is not in Fort Knox.
Is there any gold at Fort Knox?
I doubt it. Maybe a few token bars. Germany asked to repatriate its gold and was told that it had to wait for 7 years by the Federal Reserve. That is an act of war.
When it comes to gold, why do you think gold is so important? Because it's really split. You've got a limited finite supply of gold publicly, but you're saying there's 4 or 5 times more than there's stated publicly. So what is so important about gold?
If you look through history, gold has been accepted as currency. You can't take that away from gold. It has maintained its value. It's a store of value.
Karen, if somebody would like to reach out to you or learn more about the work you're doing, where can they go?
They can go to my website. That's KAHUDES.net, and there's a contact page. There's a lot of documentation there, and I can give you proof of every single statement I've made here.
Karen, I would love to do a follow-up with you in maybe a few weeks or a month or two. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person, and you're doing your best to get the facts and details of information that you have found and that you want to come to light. If there's one thing that you really would like to help people with and just the broader public and warn them about, what is one thing that you just want to really stress to everybody?
I think people have got to reach out to their neighbors and friends and work together to lift this veil of secrecy. It's just like Toto in The Wizard of Oz. When Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz, he had currency in mind. We, World Bank whistleblowers, have pulled back the curtain. We've told you that The Wizard of Oz is that banking cartel. Don't listen to the mainstream media. That is the screen that they are trying to brainwash you with. That's propaganda. That's not true. That's a bunch of lies. Do your homework and find out what's really going on.
Karen Hudes, thank you so much for your time. You have a great day.
You too.